Welcome to Women Talking About AI. Today we chat with Dr. Leslie Gruis, a former NSA veteran and author of The Privacy Pirates, about the importance of protecting our personal information in a tech-driven world. From kids' privacy to corporate data exploitation, Dr. Gruis shares her expertise and offers practical advice for safeguarding our digital lives. Enjoy!
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Women Talking About AI. Today, we're honored to be joined by Dr. Leslie Gruis, a mathematician, national security veteran, and outspoken advocate for privacy in the digital age. Dr. Gruis spent 3 decades at the U.S. National Security Agency, where she not only developed disruptive technologies for national defense, but also made history as the first president of the NSA's Women in Mathematics Society. She later served at the U.S. Cyber Command and National Intelligence Council, contributing to conversations on privacy and surveillance from within the intelligence community. Now retired, she mentors the next generation of STEM students and continues to raise awareness about data privacy in the age of AI. She's also the author of The Privacy Pirates, which I read today, which is a call to arms for protecting civil rights in our increasingly surveyed world. Dr. Gruis, welcome to the show. We're thrilled to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I am delighted to be here finally.
Yes,
So,
we had some rescheduling issues. I had a weird allergic reaction to a medication the last time we were meet. I'm fine now. Yes, thank you for your flexibility.
no worries.
So, Leslie, I mentioned when we started recording that I read your book, The Privacy Pirates, which I really enjoyed. I appreciated the historical background you provided around not only the evolution of technology and how it's changed our relationship with privacy, but also going through all of the laws that have been passed over the years by the US government in an attempt to protect our privacy. I want to touch on a bit of that today, but just to get our audience up to speed, I want to start by just defining privacy because you touch on like privacy in the physical space, privacy in the virtual space, and you really do address both of those primarily through the context of information sharing. So I'd love for you to define privacy for us and define what privacy means for you from your perspective.
Okay, so when I started this work, and it was right after I retired from the government that I started writing about privacy, I had to kind of bone up on the legal aspects because I'm not trained as an attorney. And if you ask a lawyer, there's a lot of flavors of privacy, but the privacy I want to talk about is informational privacy. So that's private information about yourself. So if you were to go into a room of 100 people and ask them all what privacy is, ask them all to give a definition, you would get 100 different definitions of what privacy is. So for me, privacy is my right to be alone, my right to retain my thoughts or share them with others, to speak my mind or to choose not to. And that privacy should extend not only to the physical world, but to the virtual world, to cyberspace. And that's really what I'm most concerned about today.
Tell us what makes you particularly concerned today, especially with I want to start at the present and then perhaps we can work our way back. So, what's top of mind for you right now in terms of privacy?
So, right now, top of mind, since I spend so much time tutoring, I tutor STEM, I also tutor SAT, so I teach English and history and a lot of other subjects. So, top of mind for me right now is the kids. So, the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act was passed in the late 1990s and has not yet been updated, although there has been a great deal of talk about updating it. I really worry about kids' privacy on school furnished computers, on the smartphones they have, on the computers they use at home. I think privacy is something they probably take for granted. I've certainly had a number of teens and even early 20-year-olds confront me and tell me that privacy doesn't exist, that it's dead. There's an easy response to that age group. That's give me your cell phone and open it up so I can read all your text messages. That's kind of like, in my generation, asking a 15-year-old girl to unlock her diary and let her mother read it. That's how horrifying it should be to them. So I think privacy does exist. I think perhaps they take it for granted. But there are things that should be private, that should remain private. And it's up to us, right? It's up to the grown-ups to set a good role model. It's up to the adults in their lives. It's up to the parents to show them why privacy is important. The bottom line in my book is that privacy is essential to democracy. If you go back to the intentions of our founding fathers, the word privacy doesn't appear in the Declaration of Independence. It doesn't appear in the Constitution, but it appears implicitly in the Bill of Rights, right? In the Fourth Amendment, the right to be free from search and seizure unless a warrant has been issued, right? The government can't come in and rifle through your home unless it has a warrant. In modern times, however, of course, that old-fashioned definition is challenged by the technology today, right? They don't actually have to come into your house to search your private information because so much of that information is available online. The right to free speech, which is, of course, hotly debated today, pro and con. Book banning is related to this topic. I think this is something that kids don't think about, but they should think about. One thing we see with people who have recently graduated from college is all those videos that they posted in the past on social media that were really funny at the time. Like maybe they've been out drinking all evening and they did something incredibly ridiculous, right? At the time, it was really funny. I get that. But unfortunately, your future employer is not necessarily going to think that's a really attractive feature of you as a potential hire, right? And so now there's a whole business that's sprung up around scrubbing that kind of stuff off of social media. So you really should stop and think about what you put out there. And I don't think our kids do that. So my biggest concern is really for the kids today. And I can go on in that vein, but perhaps you'd like to ask another question to direct my remarks.
Yeah, I have a follow-up to that because, Leslie, part of your focus in your book, The Privacy Pirates, is around this kind of more sinister use of our data. You talk about these large corporations like Facebook and Instagram and Google, about how they gather our data and they triangulate it with publicly available data like zip codes and real estate property records in order to essentially predict our future behaviors. And they leverage artificial intelligence to do that because artificial intelligence is very good at recognizing patterns in the data and making predictions. When I think about what that means for kids today who have grown up in a world where they don't know any different, they've always been surrounded by technology. They don't necessarily question what's happening with their data because it's all around them. What does that mean going back to your concern about kids in schools and how technology is increasingly being used for, things like personalized learning? Help us connect the dots there, because even though it might not be these corporations that we think of, although, now Facebook has their own large language model that they're using. Help us connect the dots there between these conversations that you have in the book around the privacy pirates, these corporations using our data, and how to help me connect the dots for kids and their data and what the concerns are.
So that's a really interesting question. And let me answer it first by giving an example from my book, where the lead character, Alice, who is a 14-year-old girl, discovers that her head has been taken and put on a body that is not completely clothed. and posted to the internet. And she, of course, is horrified. Her father is incensed and ready to sue everybody because he's an attorney. And her father very quickly discovers that there's really nothing he can do. This is the way life is today. I think when you have a personal experience like that, or when it happens to a dear friend, it makes it real in a way that perhaps it doesn't seem real otherwise. So there's so many dimensions of privacy threats to kids today. It's hard to enumerate them all. One thing I have been writing about is simple things like even school-issued laptops. When you go in to sign for a school-issued laptop at the beginning of the school year, you're going to sign a release, right? It's sort of like your voucher that you sign that says, "Yay, verily, we take responsibility for this laptop and we won't, step on it and drop it and run it over with a car." But there's also a phrase in there, which is basically your privacy notice, just like the privacy notices we get on the internet. And that phraseology actually says you have no right to privacy with this machine. The school reserves the right to monitor all the child's activities with this laptop for their own protection, of course. Now, I could see the motivation, but if I had a school-age child today, no way, no how would I sign up to that. I would be the curmudgeonly Luddite parent who said, "Keep your laptop. I'm going to buy my kid their own laptop, and you figure out how they're going to get access to the content they need." That's how strongly I feel about this. There are any number of horror stories out there about schools that took advantage of the facility to go in and monitor students' behavior, including there was a 15-year-old boy who had pictures of himself taken in his bedroom with the camera on the school laptop, which was dramatized into a miniseries called Spy High. I don't want that amount of intrusion in my child's life. No parent should want that. Okay, so there's a lot of common sense things that parents could be doing. I am a parent, but my child is grown. So I completely empathize with the situation that parents find themselves in. And yet, your child is a minor. It's your job to look out for their privacy. If they have a school laptop, then maybe you really need to think about, is this a necessary thing? Or is this something I'm not willing to compromise on? The same thing goes for smartphones and social media, right? Kids post all sorts of things to social media. Some of them will be things they regret later. Some of them can be identifying information. They can be used for geo-tracking, so they can figure out where you are. It just kind of goes on and on. It makes it harder for us to protect our kids when they go out into this virtual world, which is really a wild west, and are unsupervised in ways that parents shouldn't be okay with.
Yeah, and yeah, go ahead, Kimberly.
Well, as a parent of a 15-year-old boy, I'm stuck on the story about the child with the laptop. And I'm just thinking about how it connects, like what you said, you wouldn't want your child to use a school issued laptop because of the privacy issues, and you would buy them their own. And I'm just thinking there are probably lots of parents listening to this who think, oh, yeah, I can do that. But then how's the school gonna push back on that? And isn't that going to create kind of a little bit of chaos between parents and teachers? And then beyond that, doesn't it create an equity issue with not everybody could buy their child a laptop, which is why they're provided in the first place. So just can you speak to that a little bit more?
Let me address the equity issue first. So I did some investigating. I have an article that'll be coming out hopefully soon. We're in the final stages of negotiations on that right now. So there seem to be, from what I can tell, kind of two reasons why we've had this move to computer-based learning, maybe two and a half reasons. The first reason was it was around, I can't remember the year, 2005. The idea of one laptop per child emerged. Everybody thought this was going to be the solution to all our problems, right? Everybody thought it was going to be wonderful. And it turned out that these laptops cost more than people intended and didn't work as well as they wanted and required electricity, which many of the world's children do not have. And it was an abject failure. Okay. So that's kind of maybe the origins of this digital equity idea that caught on. Of course, COVID didn't really help the situation. It only propelled us all into moving to laptops. Everybody should have realized, having lived through COVID, where we all had to live online, that is not the ideal learning environment, right? We missed all those sort of social development skills. Kids missed them. Even the grown-ups missed them. People craved human company. When COVID was over, they wanted to connect person to person with people, right? It was clear. So there's another thing, and I hadn't thought about it a lot, but it was in the 1990s when the internet emerged. And there was also a discussion about bandwidth equity, as you would have it, right? And I remember President Clinton, giving a speech where he says, we're going to roll it out so everybody has connectivity to the digital super highway, blah, 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 on and on. So there was this sense of bandwidth equity that also existed too. And just for those of you in the audience that like the little history nuggets, that's an idea that actually goes back to the late 1800s and early 1900s with providing rural electrification and rural telephone service to people in farming communities at a reasonable cost, which meant that all the rest of us got to pay a small surcharge each month in order to subsidize that cost. And as a matter of fact, if you go and look on your cell phone bill today, there's still a charge on your cell phone bill for that. Mine was $1.50 last month, and I don't begrudge them that. So there's a long history there of wanting to make sure that everybody has equal access to equal services. However, with that said, if digital education and digital delivery of curriculum was going to be so great, we should have seen remarkable rises in test scores. And yet we have not. Now, there are confounding events. For example, COVID probably was a confounding event, but there had already been a decades-long slide in terms of U.S. test scores in math, in English, and in science. So I don't think the real experiment has been done here that shows that digital delivery of content is better for kids than what we have had in the past. I'm not convinced. So in answer to your question about the computers, I'm not a believer in computer technology. That would just be too bad for the public school. They're going to have to figure it out. If enough people push back, they're going to have to find a way to figure it out. And I get why schools want to move to digital platforms. It certainly helps the poor, overworked teachers, right, to have a digital platform that can adapt to the learning needs of each child in the ideal world. That would be fantastic. It's probably really helpful to teachers for lesson planning, for assigning homework, for collecting homework, maybe even for grading homework. It's probably wonderful on digital assessments, right? Standardized testing, which I think most states do. I could see a lot of the virtues for the schools, for the administrators, and for the teachers. I don't see those same advantages for the kids. And what are we really in this for? It's really supposed to be about the kids. So I'm fearful that the kids got lost in the shuffle here. And I have lots of anecdotal evidence I can give you from the kids I tutor every day at grades, from like age 3 to age 20. I see it again and again. the problems they have had because of the digital learning environment, and I have to go back and I have to fill in that stuff as the tutor, as the paid for tutor for these kids. Does that answer all your questions?
Yeah, I guess you have kind of a deeper concern about technology and education in general, which is something, I didn't. Jessica and I started a company together, and it was an ed tech company. And at the time, we had no idea that there was such animosity between educators, ed tech leaders, and ed tech. We were constantly blindsided by that because we were already educators and teachers, and we wanted to say, like, we're one of you. Like, don't attack us. We're one of you. But then they were making good points. I mean, as you are. So do you think there's a version of like digital learning or computers in education that could meet both pedagogical and ethical standards, or is it always like a compromise?
I think it's going to be a compromise. I actually spent a lot of time reading the PISA assessments to get out the scores, the trends in scores. And one of the things that stuck with me from the PISA assessments, there was a quote from one of the PISA officials that said, in countries where they don't rely as heavily on digital technology to deliver content, the children do better on standardized assessments. Now, that's a data point, okay? It's not a deciding point, it's a data point, okay? And then another PISA quote that I found that I actually used in the piece I've been working on was that it's going to be a careful balance that we're going to have to come up with. In other words, digital tools are probably going to be wonderful for education, but finding the right amount of digital delivery and the right content for digital delivery, that's really the hard part now. It's not going to be a panacea, okay? It's not going to solve all our problems. I'm afraid our teachers are still going to be underworked and overworked and underpaid. And I'm really sorry about that. And that should change too. My heart goes out to all those kindergarten, first, second grade teachers with 30 kids in the class, because I know I can barely contain 3 over a 2-hour tutoring session, especially when they're the younger ones that can't sit still. So I really am very empathetic to their plight. But that is something that we have to come to terms with in our country, that we pay our public school teachers so poorly.
Yeah, and I could see where if I'm imagining I'm in the shoes of a public school teacher, which I never have been, but I still have been an educator and I've had a class of 26 students, which is difficult, even at the doctoral level. And there's these promises that are being made that AI is going to democratize education. It's going to deliver personalized learning at scale. It's going to solve Bloom's two sigma problem. And I'm not going to lie, in the early days, I drank the Kool-Aid. I remember giving a talk about 2 years ago when I talked about solving Bloom's two sigma problem. Like I was drinking the Kool-Aid. But then over time, I've just learned a lot. I've definitely shifted my perspective, but I'm imagining I'm an educator and I'm overwhelmed and I'm underpaid and I'm being sold this magic pill I'm being told it's going to fix all of my problems and we don't have any data. And then you also see on the other side that the companies pushing these solutions, these for-profit companies, and now I'm thinking about it through this privacy perspective, it just feels like an impossible task. And I'm not necessarily asking you to answer a question. I'm just kind of commenting on the challenge that our educators are facing. It feels like just this impossible situation that they're in. And then I think of leaders, school principals, deans of colleges and universities, where faculty are coming to them asking for answers. They don't know how to deal with widespread cheating and plagiarism. The students are using it. There's just a lot that's happening, and it feels like there's a lot of noise, and it's really hard to find the signal. And I'm just wondering if you just have any thoughts or advice to share about that, since you are in this position where you're interfacing with parents and children directly.
So I spend far less time with parents. Our center director handles parents. But when I see a child that has a specific problem, you have to remember, as a tutor, I sometimes have less insight into any special needs a child might have than perhaps a school might have, right? That may come out over time, but I may not know about it right at the outset. So if the kid is ADHD and on medication, and the medication puts the kid to sleep at the time they're here in the classroom, then all I can say is they're really sleepy and I don't understand why, because they had 8 hours of sleep last. I can only speak to what I see with the kids most of the time. And what I see with the kids is overdependence on smartphones, getting smartphones way too young, spending way too much time on social media. I've spent a lot of time reading the experts on this subject. And it really makes sense to me when they say, well, at this age, 11, 12, 13, and they get so enamored of social media, and they're all going to have smartphones because otherwise, they're going to die because everybody has a smartphone and I will be the only person that doesn't have a smartphone. Yeah, I get it. But you know what? These kids have immature brains, right? Their frontal lobes are not mature. They don't know when to stop. They are prone to addiction, which is why teen addiction is such a difficult problem to deal with. This is just another form of addiction for these kids. And unfortunately, like any addiction, it creates neural pathways of reward for them, right? The more you use it, the better it feels, right? And so there's a lot of people writing right now that basically say you should just take their smartphones away. Don't give them a smartphone. If they have to have a phone, give them a dumb phone and no social media. And there's a brand new book out by a woman named Claire Morell called The Tech Exit. And it talks about going basically cold turkey, right? A tech detox for kids. Yes, your life as a parent is going to be hell for several weeks. But compared to the hell you're already going through, where you're having arguments every day about screen time and undone homework and not paying attention in class and beating up the kid next to you because you didn't develop those in-person social skills to resolve conflict, maybe it's worth it. Right? The kids are doing a digital detox. It even goes so far as to say you need to build a community of like-minded parents, right? You need to find the like-minded parents at your kid's school who agree that this technology is toxic for these kids. And you know what? All these kids are not going to have smartphones. And what are they going to do? Oh, they're going to go outside and play, which is probably the best thing in the world they could be doing. But
Yeah. We had another guest on, and that was our almost entire conversation was like, but how do we get brave enough to actually do it? And how do we approach other parents and say, hey, I really want my kid to, put the phone up at 9 o'clock or whatever it is. And yeah, that was just kind of banding together was she was a parent of younger children, but mine are teens. But can we go back to your definition of privacy,
yeah,
especially the idea of like, informational privacy being about yourself and protecting who you are, and that really resonated with me, and I wonder, like, in a world where kids are being encouraged to kind of post and share, it's almost like performance. I mean, when I taught freshman composition, we taught written, oral, visual, and electronic rhetoric, essentially like creation and composition, and so in some cases, it's actually being taught as a genre or a form of writing. So, how do we help, especially younger kids, understand what should be private and what are the conversations? Or I also love what you said about story and how we can make stories be part of those conversations, either at home or in schools, and to build that awareness.
so I think we all remember, when your child is very little, especially your first child is very little, and you're kind of freaking out still because you're not really ready to be a parent. There's all these sort of things that you learn as you go along. And one thing for explaining to small children about protecting themselves physically, you talk about good touch and bad touch. It's a simple way to deal with what could be otherwise a really scary topic for a small child, right? So there must be ways to explain good sharing and bad sharing, for example, right? You don't need to tell the entire world that we're going on vacation for 6 weeks to Europe and that our house will be empty so that it can be robbed in our absence. Okay, that's not an appropriate amount of information to share. You can share maybe something else, something a little different, or just say that your Aunt Teresa will be staying there to feed the cats if you want. I don't really care what you say. But there are just little innocuous things, right? If you are intent on doing something, exploiting someone or taking advantage of them, it's possible to take all those little breadcrumbs of information and put it together and come to a conclusion that this house will be empty these dates. And I know that they have a valuable painting collection. So it would be a really good idea to rob this house while these people are out of town. So I think we use the good touch, bad touch model. And we say, okay, good sharing, bad sharing, right? You don't need to share with all your friends online, sweetheart, that your mommy works for the National Security Agency because I'm really not comfortable with that, sweetheart. Luckily, we didn't have social media when mine was little, so, right? But there are certain things in families we share. And there's other things in families we don't share. And being parents or having been a teacher of a small child, small children will tell you a remarkable amount of information about what's going in the private lives of their families. Like mommy and daddy are fighting all the time, right? All sorts of things you learn, right? Most of them are kind of funny. I've never had to call child services yet, right? But you learn all sorts of things from kids. So they need to be aware that there's good sharing of information and there's bad sharing of information and that they need to protect themselves. And maybe you need to tell them some scary stories as they get older. So I can remember when my son was young, and at that point in time, I was still a single parent, having divorced his father. And I kept thinking, oh my God, I'm going to have the sex talk with my son because I can't count on his dad to do that. This is going to be really tough. And so what I decided is it was a series of talks, and they all occurred before he was 10 and anywhere close to puberty, right? Because he was left self-conscious about it. We also had the AIDS epidemic, I think, still going on a little bit at that point in time. So I remember him getting very mad at me because I think I really scared him about the AIDS epidemic at some point in time. But it's the kind of thing he needed to be aware of, right? Ahead of time, before we find yourself in that situation, right? So I didn't protect him, right? I did it with all of the best purposes. And it obviously got through because he remembers it to this day, and he's 31 now. So sometimes you have to have those tough conversations, right? And sometimes you have to stand up and be the parent, right? And if being the parent means the cell phone goes in the safe at 6 p.m. every night, that's what it is, no matter how much they kick and scream and they make your life a living Dante's Inferno.
Leslie, tell us a bit about I'm going to take a little bit of a left turn from this conversation because I want to work our way toward AI and surveillance. And I'd love for you to provide a bit of background on your role at the National Security Agency and how that work just informs your current perspectives around data and privacy. Um,
Okay, I can do that. So I was trained as a mathematician. That's mathematics is what my PhD is in. And so I went to work at the National Security Agency. The great thing about having a degree in mathematics is you get to play in any area you want to, right? So you can kind of come in and say, oh, I think I'll work on an engineering kind of problem now. And so I did that for a few years. Then you say, oh, I think I'll work on a computer science kind of problem now. And then you go and you do that for a few years. And then you say, here's an opportunity to work in computational linguistics. That looks kind of cool. Let's go do that for a while, right? So I did all sorts of things. I got to work with the physicists at one point in time. I got to work with intelligence analysts, right? So it was really a lot of fun to have all these different kinds of jobs. The only trick is you have to give yourself like 2 weeks to figure out what the vocabulary is in whatever the new discipline is, because the math underneath is all the same, but they have different names for all of it, right? So you just have to kind of figure that part out. So with that territory comes, of course, the kind of work we did. So the National Security Agency is responsible for making and breaking secret codes. That's our job in communications, right? So I've done both kinds of work. We designed a lot of new technologies. And one of the challenges with the new technologies, it's like that wonderful line in Jurassic Park when the hero mathematician looks at the owner of Jurassic Park and he says, the problem with you scientists is, because of course he's a mathematician, right? The problem with you scientists is you got so excited about being able to figure out if you could do it, you forgot to ask yourselves if you should do it, right? And that's kind of where we are with AI today, by the way. And I lived this at NSA because even though we technically proved that we could do something, we still had to go to the lawyers and say, but should we do this? Does this really respect the civil rights of our citizens in this country? And so I ended up spending a fair amount of time with the lawyers because I could bridge the gap between the technical world and the legal world, probably because I had relatives that were lawyers. So I had grown up in that kind of an environment, right? And so basically, I'm just reapplying that skill here today when I'm looking at AI and I'm saying, well, everybody got so excited because we wanted to make sure we could do it. But the real question, as Jeffrey Hinton said at his Nobel Prize Laureate Award, should we do it? Right? Did we stop to ask if we should do it? And that's kind of where we are today.
Well, and to piggyback on that, oftentimes the way these tools or just this art- generative artificial intelligence is being marketed to us, it feels like an individual decision. Should I use it for my work? Should I use it for learning? Should I use it to help me plan this trip? But it's being marketed to us by these corporations wrapped in this sort of promise of productivity and, all the shiny things. But the reality of it is most of us are not really questioning, who benefits from this usage? Who benefits when I'm logging into OpenAI and using ChatGPT? Who benefits when I log into Anthropic and use Claude or any of these large language models or any of the specialized tools that operate with those large language models on the back end? And I think it's overwhelming for the average consumer. But from this perspective of privacy, it almost like just educating myself on this a bit more this week, it almost makes it it gives me some clarity. It feels like this kind of cuts through a lot of that noise and makes some of the decisions a bit easier for me. Like I really started questioning, okay, what exactly is happening to this information and how is it being used and is it transparent? And I don't know that I was looking at that like granular of a level before. I was thinking about it higher level, like when the news was talking about, okay, well, now the government says that they can get access to your chats with Chat GPT. And even if you turn on temporary chats, and people were talking about that, but addressing it really from this privacy perspective, I think just makes it a little easier to just think about, okay, am I going to use this and who's benefiting from it? Because that's what you touch on in the privacy pirates. The privacy pirates are these corporations and they benefit because they make profit. They can monetize and your data is a commodity to them. I don't really have a question for you. I'm just giving some commentary because you're making me think about a lot of the things that you touched on in the book and trying to make those connections to present day and a lot of the decisions that are just in front of us.
Yeah, I think the most alarming, of course, is I don't know if you guys have been following this, but Facebook, Meta, has had any number of whistleblowers that have come out and talked about some of the things that they were doing behind the scenes. And the most recent book, and her name is Sarah something, and she gave testimony before Congress, as a matter of fact, in the last couple months. I can't think of her name. But anyway, she talks about in the book version of this how Facebook uses sentiment analysis in social media for adolescents to determine their state of mind and then to pitch products to them. Right. So if a girl is feeling depressed or fat or whatever, they pitch products to these kids that will appeal to them in their state of mind, which is really completely atrocious, in my personal opinion. So I guess the bottom line here is this social media is doing them no favors, right? Social media isn't free. You're the product, right? So Google isn't free. You're the product, right? Amazon isn't, right, just cheap books because you're also the product, right? And I'm as guilty on Amazon as anybody because I love to read. I agree with you. You're the product. And nothing has changed, though, right? For-profit businesses have been with us for a long time and continue to be with us. And every product that they roll out, and it's the shiny new toy, and you think it's going to be great, and then it never lives up to your expectations, right? It's kind of like that McDonald's Happy Meal toy. You think it's going to be so great when you're a kid, and then you get it out of the box, and you realize it's just a hunk of cheap plastic. And why did you even want this in the first place?
Although I remember when McDonald's or one of those gave glass Charlie Brown glasses, and I collected all of them. So anyway, just
Very cool. Very cool.
yes. But yeah, I agree. There's no shortage of plastic in the world. Just to clarify for anyone listening, sentiment analysis is a kind of language processing tool or kind of a methodology that tries to figure out the emotional tone of what you're posting or what you've written. So it looks at your words and it kind of decides, like, is this happy? Is this angry, depressed, excited? And companies use this all the time to analyze and tailor what you see or even to predict your behavior. But it's far from perfect, obviously. It doesn't always pick up on things like sarcasm, cultural nuance, or context. So it can often misread people really badly, and it's automated. It's not like there's a person going, yes, this seems sarcastic or this seems angry. It's automated with lists of words that are then cross-checked against other lists and synonyms and so on. And so when that's used to feed algorithms, it raises real questions about how our emotions are being interpreted and exploited by these companies. So I think that's really important because going back to your definition of privacy, like if it's about who you are and who you represent, then I think this is it's really dangerous.
I don't disagree. I am completely with you. And I think it's despicable that they do that to our kids.
Not only that, but so many people, including myself until the last couple of years, thought of privacy in terms of, well, I don't have anything to hide, you know, and that is just the tips of the top of the iceberg as we're trying to get at here. Um, I want to touch on this idea of asymmetric power advantage, where you have a bad actor or a corporation, and then you have the consumer that's trying to keep their information private. Can you explain that a bit? Because I had never heard it worded in that way, and I thought you explained that really well in your book.
I'm trying to think about the example in the book. One of the ways I use that example oftentimes is when if you're a cyber attacker versus a cyber defender. Right? If you're a cyber defender, you got to bat 1,000, to use the baseball analogy, right? You got to plug every possible hole that anybody might come in through to exploit, right? So not only do you have to do your regular updates, but you have to be looking to make sure that your defensive wall is really secure. And then, of course, there's zero-day attacks that will come along and blow us all out of the water because nobody had thought of it yet, right? So if you're the defender, your job is really tough, okay? If you're the attacker, you only have to be successful once. And so in the cyber defense offense model, that's a real asymmetry. But the asymmetry also extends to the consumer and to the commercial companies, right? Because the commercial companies hold all the cards. They got all your data, right? They know what you bought, what you thought, what you did, where you went, who you talked to, what city you live in, what schools your kid goes to, how much money you make. It's public records. Some of that they have gleaned from the information that you've either shared with them or they've scraped off the web. Some of that information they may have inferred, and they might be wrong, right? So if they inferred I was gay and I'm not, well, I'm going to be pretty distressed if I find that out, right? Because they made a wrong inference, right? And maybe that got propagated. We'll never know, of course, because things propagate across the internet in a way that can't be stopped. Does that answer your question?
It does. It does. I picked up on that because it immediately made me think of using Google, for example, and how I use it for everything. It's my browser. It obviously targets ads to me. I go to check my email through Gmail, my calendar, everything's hosted by Google. And I think of as a consumer, I'm thinking about, okay, what are the holes I need to plug for my privacy? And it feels like an impossible task, but all from the corporation side, it's like you have access. It doesn't take much to get what you need because we're just always online. We're always on the internet, exchanging
Right.
information and putting our private information to buy goods, to communicate. So I liked that analogy that you gave about
Right.
baseball. Yeah. I know we're running low on time. I feel like I've taken over with my questions. Kimberly, do you want to ask anything? Did you want to touch on anything else? Kim? Oh, you're muted, Kimberly.
Oh, I said, I think if I do, it's going to go way down a rabbit hole. So maybe we could have her back or follow up later because, yeah, I don't have anything direct.
Yeah, I have so many questions I didn't get to, so maybe we do need to have you back. This is such an interest. There's different layers of this topic, like around, what it means for the average person, what it means for students, for learning, for tools that are used for surveillance in schools, and how, what are things parents need to worry about, but we don't have time to cover all that today. I want to end by just leaving it with like, what do you recommend? What are maybe 2 or 3 things that the average person can do to like educate themselves to better understand privacy and what's at risk and to protect their privacy?
Well, that's a really good question. So there are a lot of privacy books out there. Mine, of course, is the best because it's short.
Yes.
It's only 100 pages, a pithy 100 pages, which any of my high schoolers could actually read if they were motivated enough to read 100 pages, which they are not, most of them. But that's another topic, right? So think about it. Stop and think about it. Just because you didn't do anything bad doesn't mean that there aren't things you want to hold privately to yourself, right? Maybe you have a secret aspiration. I always tell my little kids when I talk to my little kids and I say, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And they don't answer. And I said, "I want to be a fireman," to see what kind of a reaction I get out of them. Right? Maybe you have a secret dream to write a book or be a ballerina or marry an astronaut. I don't know, right? Doesn't necessarily mean you want to share it with the entire world, right? When you go in to take a shower, you shut the door, right? That's a physical privacy. You want physical privacy for yourself, right? Sometimes you need some time on your own to just stop and think, okay? Especially when I'm writing. Sometimes if I've just been reading and reading and reading, I'm almost to the point that my brain is so full, I have to start writing something down or it's all going to spill on the floor. I just need to be left alone. The right to be left alone, right? That extends to your home. Your home is your castle. That's a principle that comes from English constitutional law, right? You should be safe in your own home, right? So your home is your castle. think about what you do to compromise your privacy. I will tell you the darkest day that appeared on my doorstep in the last year was after the new HVAC system went in. They told me that my thermostat had to be put on the internet in order for the HVAC system to work properly. Okay, now I spent a lot of money on the HVAC system, okay? So I couldn't say no. I had to hook to the internet. But then I thought, okay, so suppose I'm the recipient of the information that my thermostat is getting, right? The unintended recipient of the information. They could probably estimate how many people are home, how many showers we take a day. They could certainly tell if we're out of town, right? There's a lot of information they could glean from those little breadcrumbs, right? It really was very upsetting to me. I know it sounds probably ridiculous to a lot of people, but I was really very upset about the thermostat thing because I really wanted to keep my house as dumb as possible. I didn't really want a smart home, right? So you need to just stop and think about it. Remember on your cell phone, I'm eternally going in on my cell phone and turning off the geolocation stuff. Of course, it has to get turned back on when I get lost so I can get where I'm going, but I try to remember to go in and turn it off again, right? Because all that geo information could be available to someone. When you take pictures, there's geo coordinates that are embedded in that, and a date and a time. If anybody was trying to track your whereabouts and they had access to those photos, probably be pretty easy if you're a photo taker like me. Right? So just stop and think about it. It was Queen Elizabeth I that actually had said, I have no desire to have a window into men's souls. I don't want somebody looking inside my brain and thinking about what I'm thinking about and seeing my private thoughts because maybe they're private. I have a right to that. That is a human right. So all I would say is think about it and remember it. It's the way that we preserve our democracy is by preserving our privacy, because otherwise the government can run roughshod over us.
Yeah, that was great. I mean, I don't know that I would have thought twice about a thermostat. There's a lot of things I wouldn't have thought twice about. And I think there's an element of it where it feels like an inconvenience to have to, because we're so interconnected. I'm always online in some form or fashion, and it feels inconvenient to have to pause because it feels like there's constantly things to think about, but it's important. It's an inconvenience until it's not, until something is at risk, you know? Yeah.
So I think, one of the things that I do is when I'm going to meet somebody or I'm waiting somewhere, I don't play with my phone. I read a book. Everywhere I go, I have a book, a physical book, right? And it's like a little reward for me for somebody to be late because it means I can read some more of my book. And I love reading books. So deconnect, right? Just put it down and reconnect in a different way.
Yeah. I love that.
Well, we always end our episodes with we call it pits and peaches. I don't know if either of us shared this with you, but a pit is like kind of a low point and then a peach is your high point, and it can be the day, the week, the year, doesn't matter. So who wants to go first with their pit and their peach?
Well, I'll go if you want. The pit is I'm very distressed about what's happening at the Federal Trade Commission right now. The administration is making moves to curb its powers, its regulatory powers with respect to privacy. And I think the previous chief commissioner, Lena Khan, had done a fantastic job in privacy enforcement and bringing those privacy pirates to court and getting them to holding them accountable for their behavior. And I'm seeing that waning right now, and that's making me concerned about our privacy. The peach, I guess, was the other thing that I need to come up. Hope springs eternal. What can I say? I'm going to keep writing. I'm going to keep advocating. I'm going to keep talking to my kids about information, misinformation, disinformation, why you need to read a book and how painful it is to have to learn vocabulary in an emergency situation for the SAT because you didn't read books. That's not my fault, actually. Right? So I'm just going to keep doing my little bit and hoping that the tide will turn. That's my peach.
I love it. Your lack of vocabulary is not my emergency. Well, my pit is I don't know. I don't know what my pit is today. Well, okay, I know what my pit is. I'm doing a program called The Artist's Way. It's where you wake up every morning and you write 3 longhand pages. It's supposed to tap into your like inner child artist, and then you're supposed to take yourself on a artist date once a week. And artist dates are not productive, which is very difficult for me. They have to be kind of, I don't want to say silly, but I mean fun. And so I planned one today and I didn't make it. So that's my pit. It's kind of a surface level pit. My peach is that I got another chapter of my dissertation sent off for publication. It was a revise and resubmit, and I don't think I'm going to publish anything else from that dissertation. I am so done with it. But it does document what graduate students were writing before generative AI. So I have a huge corpus of graduate student writing from students prior to the existence of any generative technology. So even though that's not what I wasn't writing about that. It was just a linguistic analysis. I'm excited to maybe go back to the data and look at it from a different perspective. And I'm really glad to have that publication out of my inbox and on to the powers that be.
I hope I'm saying that soon. My pit is I'm behind on 2 deadlines. I'm supposed to submit the second edition of a textbook a few weeks ago, and I'm behind. And then I'm working on a textbook chapter about qualitative data analysis with AI that is also behind because we are running into issues being able to replicate some of the output, which is an inherent limitation of using large language models for data analysis tasks. So that is very frustrating. I feel like I've put in countless hours and I'm just banging my head against the wall with these tasks and not getting anywhere. And I don't normally miss deadlines. So that's my pit. My peach is that I traveled last week. I spent several days in Lake Tahoe visiting a friend who just had a baby, and the weather was absolutely phenomenal. It was a nice break from the heat and humidity we've had on the East Coast. So yeah, I spent time outside. I did not work, and it was really nice to unplug and just be with friends who I had not seen in several months. Anytime I travel in that way, I just feel more creative, and that's my own little artist way of trying to get some creativity going. Yeah. Well, Leslie, this has been wonderful. Thank you very much for making time for us. We really appreciate you. I am going to go back and finish reading your book in more depth. I might have some questions for you, especially about your take on some of these new AI surveillance issues that we've seen come about because of our focus on immigration and ICE, and if that's happening, where does it stop? When does it start encroaching on citizens? So I feel like there was a lot we didn't get to touch on, and maybe we'll be able to have you back and resume some of those conversations.
That would be terrific. I would look forward to it.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Leslie.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to Women Talking About AI. If you enjoyed this conversation, please be sure to follow the show, leave us a review, and share this episode. It really helps more people find us. Until next time.